Tatum burst through the double doors of Detroit General Hospital, his boots pounding against the chipped linoleum floor, echoing through the sterile, dimly lit hallway. In his trembling arms, he cradled Juniper, an 8-year-old girl so frail she seemed to weigh almost nothing. Her shallow breaths came in ragged gasps, her small frame shivering despite the oversized, threadbare hoodie clinging to her body. The most shocking sight, though, was her belly swollen and round, an unnatural contrast to her stick-thin arms and legs, as if something impossible was happening inside her tiny body. "Please, somebody help her." Tatum's voice cracked, raw with panic, cutting through the murmurs of the late-night hospital staff like a gunshot. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, casting a harsh, pale glow on Juniper's face. Her skin ashen, her eyes half open, wide with a mix of pain and fear. The hoodie she wore, a faded gray thing Tatum had scavenged from a thrift store months ago, was stained with dark patches, dried blood and something else, a brownish fluid that left a faint, sour stench in the air. Nurses froze mid-step, their clipboards slipping slightly in their hands as they caught sight of the little girl. A janitor pushing a mop bucket stopped dead, his jaw dropping as he muttered, "Jesus Christ." Under his breath, the hallway, usually a blur of quiet routine, turned chaotic in an instant. Orderlies darted toward supply closets. A doctor in crumpled scrubs barked orders over his shoulder, and a crowd of waiting patients craned their necks from the plastic chairs lining the walls. Tatum stumbled forward, nearly tripping over his own feet, his grip tightening around Juniper as if letting go would mean losing her forever. "She's dying. Do something," he pleaded, his voice breaking into a sob. He didn't care that his flannel shirt was soaked with whatever had seeped from her. Didn't notice the stares boring into him from every direction. All he could see was Juniper's face, twisted in agony, her tiny hands clutching at his sleeve like he was her last lifeline. A nurse with a tight bun and wide eyes rushed over, her sneakers squeaking against the floor. "What happened to her? How long has she been like this?" she demanded, reaching for Juniper's wrist to check her pulse. Tatum shook his head, words tumbling out in a frantic mess. "I don't know. I found her like this at the apartment. She was fine yesterday, I swear. And then tonight, this. Please, just help her." The nurse's face hardened as she took in the girl's condition, her gaze lingering on that swollen belly. She waved urgently to a team wheeling a gurney down the hall. "Get her to Trauma Bay 2 now." Her voice snapped like a whip, and within seconds, Juniper was lifted from Tatum's arms and laid onto the stretcher. Her head lolled to the side, a faint whimper escaping her chapped lips as the team rushed her through swinging doors marked "Authorized personnel only." Tatum tried to follow, his legs shaky, but a burly orderly blocked his path, one hand raised. "Sir, you need to stay out here. Let us work." Tatum's fists clenched at his sides, his chest heaving as he watched the doors slam shut, cutting him off from the only person he'd sworn to protect in this crumbling city. As the Trauma Bay doors swung shut behind Juniper, Tatum stood rooted to the spot, his breath coming in shallow, uneven bursts. The hallway around him buzzed with a growing murmur, a swarm of voices rising from the crowd of onlookers who'd shuffled closer, drawn by the chaos like moths to a flame. Patients waiting for their own ailments, coughing kids, a guy cradling a bandaged hand, an old woman with a walker, leaned forward in their seats, their eyes darting between Tatum and the closed doors. A woman in a puffy coat whispered loudly to her friend, "Did you see that kid? She's what, 8? And that belly looks like she's about to pop." Her friend nodded, clutching her purse tighter. "No way, that's normal. Something's seriously messed up here." The whispers turned into a low roar, speculation spreading like wildfire through the packed waiting area. A man with a scruffy beard and a trucker hat tilted his head toward Tatum, his voice carrying over the din. "That guy brought her in, right? What kind of creep lets a little girl get like that?" Heads turned, and suddenly dozens of eyes were locked on Tatum, sharp and accusing. He felt the weight of their stares like a physical blow, his shoulders hunching as if he could shrink away from it. A teenage girl scrolling on her phone looked up, her lip curling in disgust. "I bet he's the one who did it. Look at him, standing there all twitchy. Guilty as hell." Her words sparked a ripple of agreement. Nods, grunts, a few yes from the crowd. Someone muttered, "They oughta lock him up right now." Tatum's hands balled into fists, his knuckles whitening as he fought the urge to scream. He wanted to turn around, to shout that they were wrong, that he'd spent the last 2 years scraping by just to keep Juniper fed and safe in a city that chewed up people like them. But his throat tightened, words choking off before they could form. All he could do was stand there, staring at the scuffed floor, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a swarm of angry bees. He could still feel Juniper's frail grip on his sleeve, her terrified eyes pleading with him to fix this, and now she was gone, whisked away behind those doors while he was left to face a jury of strangers. A nurse rushed past, her clipboard clattering as she barked into a walkie-talkie. "We need Dr. Ellis down here stat. She's crashing." The words hit Tatum like a punch to the gut, and he lunged forward, desperation overriding everything else. "Wait, crashing? Is she okay? Tell me she's okay." His voice cracked, raw and loud, drawing even more attention. The orderly from before stepped back into his path, arms crossed, his bulk filling the space. "Sir, I told you you can't go in there. They're doing everything they can. Back off." Tatum's chest heaved, his eyes wild as he tried to peer past the man, catching only a glimpse of white coats and flashing lights through the narrow window in the door. Behind him, the crowd's chatter grew darker. A middle-aged guy in a lion's jacket leaned over to his wife, his voice low but clear. "I'm telling you, no normal person hauls a kid in like that unless they're covering something up. Bet he's been hiding her away, doing God knows what." His wife clutched her rosary beads, nodding grimly. Poor thing, probably scared to death of him. Somebody call the cops already. Tatum caught snippets of it, the suspicion, the disgust, and it twisted in his gut like a knife. He spun around, his voice shaking as he finally snapped. "I didn't do anything to her. I'm trying to save her." Damn it! His outburst only fueled the fire. A woman with a toddler on her hip shot back. "Yeah, sure, buddy. That's what they all say." A few others chimed in. "Liar! Sicko!" Their voices overlapping into a chorus of condemnation. Tatum's knees buckled slightly, the weight of their words pressing down on him like a collapsing wall. He'd found Juniper shivering outside a 7-Eleven 2 winters ago, her sneakers soaked through, no one else around to care. He'd given her his coat, bought her a hot chocolate, and promised she wouldn't be alone anymore. Now that promise felt like it was slipping through his fingers, drowned out by the growing roar of a crowd that had already made up its mind. He sank onto a nearby chair, head in his hands, praying the doctors could pull Juniper through, because if they didn't, he wasn't sure he could face what came next. Inside the trauma bay, the air was thick with tension, the antiseptic smell mingling with the faint metallic tang of blood. The room buzzed with controlled chaos, beeping monitors, the clatter of metal instruments, and the sharp, clipped voices of the medical team as they swarmed around Juniper's tiny form on the operating table. She lay there under the blinding surgical lights, her fragile body dwarfed by the tangle of tubes and wires snaking across her. Her hoodie had been cut away, revealing a belly so distended it looked like it belonged to someone else, not an 8-year-old girl whose ribs still poked through her skin. Dr. Ellis, a wiry man with graying hair and steady hands, stood at the head of the table, his brow furrowed as he barked orders. BP's dropping, 80/50. Get me 2 units of Oneg now. A nurse scrambled to the blood bank cooler, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The team moved like a well-oiled machine, but their faces betrayed the shock they couldn't quite hide. A young resident, Dr. Patel, hovered near Juniper's side, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted in 4-line. "This can't be real," she muttered under her breath, her voice barely audible over the steady beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor. "She's just a kid. How is she pregnant?" No one answered. There wasn't time. A surgical tech swabbed Juniper's abdomen with iodine, the orange stain stark against her pale skin, while another nurse prepped the anesthesia mask, pressing it gently over her small, chapped lips. Juniper's eyes fluttered shut, her whimpers fading as the drugs took hold, leaving her limp and silent under the sterile drape. Dr. Ellis gripped the scalpel, his jaw tight as he made the first incision, a clean, precise line across her swollen belly. Blood welled up instantly, bright red against the blue cloth, and a nurse dabbed it away with gauze, her movements quick and practiced. The room fell into a tense hush, broken only by the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator and the occasional ping of a monitor. "Suction," Ellis snapped, and a tech handed him the device, clearing the field as he worked deeper. Minutes stretched into an eternity, every second heavy with the weight of what they were uncovering. Then, a sharp, piercing cry shattered the silence. A baby's wail, raw and insistent, echoing off the tiled walls. The team froze for a split second, eyes wide, before snapping back into action. "Holy! Get the cord clamped," Ellis shouted, his voice steady but laced with disbelief. A nurse snipped the umbilical cord with shaking hands, and Dr. Patel carefully lifted the newborn. A tiny, wriggling boy, red-faced and screaming, out of Juniper's womb. He was small, barely 5 pounds, but his cries were strong, a defiant announcement of life in a room thick with dread. The tech wrapped him in a soft blanket, whisking him to a warming station in the corner, where a pediatric nurse began checking vitals. "He's stable," she called out, her tone a mix of relief and astonishment. "Heart rate's good. Lungs are clear." For a fleeting moment, the team exhaled, the pressure lifting just enough to breathe. But the relief didn't last. "She's hemorrhaging." Dr. Patel's voice cut through the room, sharp with urgency. The monitor screeched a warning. Juniper's blood pressure was plummeting, her heart rate spiking erratically. Blood pooled beneath her, soaking the drapes, and the team surged back to her side. "Push more fluids. Where's that second unit?" Ellis demanded, his hands moving faster now, suturing as quickly as he could to stem the flow. A nurse swapped out an empty 4-bag, her fingers fumbling with the tubing in her haste. "She's too small for this. She's losing too much," she said, her voice tight with panic. Juniper's chest rose and fell unevenly, her skin turning a ghostly shade of gray under the lights. Ellis leaned closer, peering into the open cavity, and his hands stilled for a fraction of a second. "Wait, hold on. This isn't right." His tone shifted, confusion creeping in. Dr. Patel stepped up beside him, her breath catching as she followed his gaze. "What the hell?" she whispered. Inside Juniper's tiny frame, her reproductive organs, uterus, ovaries, everything, looked fully developed, like those of a grown woman. It was impossible, a medical anomaly that defied everything they'd ever seen. "She's 8, Patel said, her voice trembling. "This shouldn't be happening. Her body shouldn't be capable of this." Ellis shook his head, his mind racing. "I've been doing this 20 years and I've never—" He cut himself off, refocusing. "Doesn't matter. We figure it out later. Right now, we save her." The team redoubled their efforts, stitching and transfusing, fighting to stabilize her. Sweat beaded on Ellis's forehead, dripping onto his mask as he worked, his hands steady despite the storm in his head. The baby's cries faded into the background, a distant reminder of the miracle they'd just witnessed, while Juniper's life hung by a thread. Outside, Tatum waited, oblivious to the battle unfolding, but inside, every second was a race against the unthinkable. A child giving birth, a body breaking under a burden it was never meant to bear, and a mystery that left even the hardened doctors reeling. The recovery room was a stark contrast to the chaos of the trauma bay. A soft hum of machines, dimmed lights casting long shadows across the linoleum floor, and the faint smell of antiseptic hanging in the air. Juniper lay in the narrow hospital bed, her small frame swallowed by a crisp white sheet, and 4-line taped to her bony arm, dripping fluids drop by drop. Her eyes were half open, glassy and unfocused, staring out the window where the gray Detroit skyline loomed under a heavy March sky. Beside her, cradled in the crook of her elbow, was the newborn boy, swaddled in a pale blue blanket, his tiny chest rising and falling with each steady breath. She hadn't let go of him since they'd brought him back from the warmer, her thin fingers clutching the edge of the blanket like it was an anchor keeping her tethered to reality. Tatum sat in a plastic chair pulled close to the bed, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, just watched her, his bloodshot eyes tracing every shallow breath she took. The nurses had cleaned her up, wiped away the blood and grime, but she still looked so fragile, like a gust of wind could shatter her. "Hey, kiddo," he said softly, his voice rough from hours of silence. "You're doing great. You're tougher than anyone I know." Juniper's gaze shifted slowly to him, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but she didn't speak. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again, as if the words were too heavy to lift. Dr. Ellis pushed through the door, his scrubs wrinkled from the long night, a clipboard tucked under his arm. He paused at the foot of the bed, his expression softening as he looked at Juniper. "How you holding up, champ?" he asked, his tone gentle but laced with the weight of what he'd seen in that operating room. Juniper blinked, her hand tightening around the baby's blanket. "He's mine?" she whispered, her voice so faint it barely carried. Ellis nodded, crouching down to her level. "Yeah, he's yours. A healthy little guy, too. You did something incredible back there." Her brow furrowed, confusion and exhaustion warring on her face. I don't understand," she murmured, glancing down at the sleeping infant. Ellis exchanged a look with Tatum, then sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle her. "Juniper, we need to know what happened. How you got here. Can you tell us?" His voice was steady, coaxing, but there was an urgency behind it. She flinched, her shoulders hunching as if the question itself was a blow. Her eyes darted to Tatum, then back to the baby, and for a long moment, the room was silent except for the rhythmic beep of the monitor tracking her pulse. Finally, she spoke, her words halting and brittle. "There was a guy, Gideon. He hung around the apartment sometimes. Said he'd help us out. Me and Aunt Zelda. Brought groceries once. Fixed the sink. I thought he was nice." Tatum's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek as he leaned closer. "Gideon? Who's that?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. Juniper's breath hitched, and she pulled the baby closer, her fingers trembling. "He was Aunt Zelda's friend, or boyfriend, maybe. I don't know. She'd leave me with him when she went out. Said I had to listen to him or we'd lose the place." Her voice cracked, and tears welled up, spilling down her cheeks in silent streaks. "He said he'd take care of me, but then he started doing things. Bad things. I didn't know what to do. I was scared to tell anyone." Tatum's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms as a wave of fury and guilt crashed over him. He'd taken Juniper in 2 years ago, found her shivering outside a convenience store with nothing but a backpack and a busted lip, and promised her a safe place. He'd thought he was protecting her from the streets, from hunger, from the cold, but he hadn't known about this. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice breaking. "I would have stopped him, June. I swear." She shook her head, her matted hair falling over her face. "I thought you'd kick me out, or he'd hurt you." He said no one would believe me. Before Tatum could respond, the door creaked open again, and a woman stormed in. Aunt Zelda, her frizzy hair pulled back in a messy bun, her eyes red and puffy like she'd been crying or hadn't slept in days. She wore a faded denim jacket over a thrift store dress, her hands twisting nervously at her sides. "Juniper, oh my God, baby girl," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she rushed to the bedside. "I came as soon as I heard. I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Juniper stiffened, her arms tightening around the baby as she shrank back against the pillow. "You left me with him," she whispered, her tone flat but cutting. "You said he'd watch me." Zelda's face crumpled, and she reached out, but Juniper flinched away. "I didn't know, I swear. He seemed fine, helped out when I couldn't pay rent. I was working doubles at the diner, trying to keep us afloat. I never thought." Her words trailed off, choked by a sob. Tatum stood up, stepping between them, his voice low and hard. "Where were you, huh? I've been taking care of her for 2 years because you weren't there. And now you show up acting like you care. Zelda's eyes flashed with guilt and defiance. She's my niece. I've been looking for her, asking around, putting up flyers. I didn't know she was with you. Dr. Ellis raised a hand, cutting through the tension. Enough. Juniper's been through hell, and she doesn't need this right now. He turned to her, his voice softening again. You don't have to go anywhere you don't want to, okay? We're gonna figure this out, get you safe. But we need to call the police, report this Gideon guy. Can you handle that? Juniper hesitated, then nodded slowly, her eyes locked on the baby's tiny face. Yeah, she said, barely audible. I want him gone. Ellis gave her a reassuring nod, then stepped out to make the call, leaving Tatum and Zelda in an uneasy standoff, the weight of Juniper's words hanging heavy in the quiet room. The fluorescent lights in the hospital hallway buzzed faintly, casting a cold, sterile glow over the chipped walls and worn-out benches where Tatum sat. His head bowed and his hands clasped tightly between his knees. Hours had passed since Juniper's shaky confession in the recovery room, and the Detroit police had swooped in like a storm. 2 officers in crisp uniforms, radios crackling, taking her statement through the door while Tatum waited outside, barred from entering. They tracked down Gideon within an hour, hauling him in from a rundown duplex on the east side. His name pulled from Zelda's tearful ramblings and Juniper's trembling words. The cops had emerged grim-faced, one of them clapping Tatum on the shoulder with a curt, "We got him. He's not going anywhere." But the relief Tatum expected didn't come. Instead, a hollow ache settled in his chest as he watched the world outside that room keep spinning, oblivious to the wreckage left behind. Back in the waiting area, the crowd hadn't thinned. Patients, visitors, even a couple of orderlies on break lingered, their voices a low hum of gossip that hadn't let up since Juniper's gurney disappeared behind those doors. The guy in the lion's jacket was still there, nursing a styrofoam cup of coffee, his wife beside him flipping through a dog-eared magazine. "Told you they'd nab someone," he said, loud enough for Tatum to hear. "But that guy who brought her in? Still shady. You don't just stumble across a kid like that unless you're mixed up in something." His wife nodded, not looking up. Probably knew the creep who did it. Maybe even helped cover it up. Tatum's jaw clenched, his fingers digging into his palms as he fought the urge to march over and set them straight. He wasn't some lowlife. He'd been the one feeding Juniper, making sure she had a coat for the brutal Michigan winters, teaching her how to read street signs so she wouldn't get lost. But to them, he was just a scruffy nobody in a flannel shirt, guilty by association. A teenage girl across the room, her earbuds dangling, scrolled through her phone and smirked. "Check this. Someone's already posting about it on X. Mystery guy drags pregnant kid into Detroit General. People are losing it." She tapped her screen, reading aloud. "Bet he's one of those weirdos who picks up strays to look like a hero. Hashtag creep alert." A few people nearby chuckled, and Tatum felt the heat rise in his neck, his pulse pounding in his ears. He wanted to yell, to tell them he'd found Juniper 2 years ago outside a 7-Eleven. Her sneakers soaked through and her backpack half empty. No one else around to give a damn. He'd taken her in because leaving her there wasn't an option. Not in a city where kids like her disappeared every day. But the truth didn't matter to these people. They'd already written their story, and he was the villain. The hospital doors slid open, and Dr. Ellis stepped out, his face lined with exhaustion as he waved Tatum over. "She's resting now," he said, his voice low. "The baby's in the NICU doing fine. Cops got what they needed, Gideon's locked up, and they're digging into his history. Looks like he's got a rap sheet a mile long." Tatum nodded, relief warring with the knot in his gut. "And June? She gonna be okay?" Ellis sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Physically, she's stable. But mentally, she's a kid who just went through something no one should. She's asking for you, though. Keeps saying you're the only one she trusts." Tatum's throat tightened, and he swallowed hard, the weight of her faith in him pressing down like a stone. He followed Ellis back toward the recovery room, but the whispers trailed him like a shadow. A nurse at the desk glanced up from her paperwork, her lips pursed. "That's him, right? The one who brought her in? Wonder what his deal is." A janitor mopping nearby shrugged. "Probably some sob story to dodge the heat. Seen it before." Tatum kept his head down, his boots scuffing the floor, each word a jab he couldn't dodge. He wasn't a saint. He'd made mistakes, scraped by on odd jobs, lived in a crumbling walk-up with peeling paint and a leaky roof. But Juniper? She'd been his chance to do something right, to give her the stability he'd never had growing up in this city's underbelly. Now that choice had painted a target on his back. Inside the room, Juniper lay propped up on pillows, her eyes red-rimmed but open, the baby gone to the NICU for monitoring. She looked smaller than ever, the 4-line dwarfing her arm. But when she saw Tatum, a faint smile flickered across her face. "They got him," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "He can't come back, right?" Tatum pulled the chair close, sitting so their knees nearly touched. "Yeah, June. He's done. You're safe now." She nodded, her fingers twisting the edge of the sheet. "Everyone out there, they think you're bad. I heard them. But you're not. You're my family." Her words hit him like a freight train, and he blinked back the sting in his eyes, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "I'm not going anywhere, kid. Screw what they think. We'll get through this." The door creaked, and Zelda hovered in the frame, her denim jacket slung over one arm, her face a mess of guilt and desperation. "I'm not here to fight," she said quickly, her voice shaky. "I just want to see her." Tatum tensed, but Juniper's grip on his hand tightened, and she shook her head. "Not now," she murmured. "I just want you here, Tatum." Zelda's shoulders slumped, and she backed off, the door clicking shut behind her. Tatum stayed put, his hand still in hers, the noise of the hospital fading into a dull roar beyond the walls. The world could judge him all it wanted. He'd take every hit if it meant Juniper didn't have to face this alone. The recovery room felt quieter now, the sterile hum of machines softened by the pale morning light filtering through the window blinds. Juniper sat propped up in the hospital bed, her thin frame still dwarfed by the pillows, but her grip on the blue blanket cradling her baby was steady. The newborn slept soundly against her chest, his tiny fists curled near his face, oblivious to the storm that had brought him into the world. Outside, the Detroit skyline stretched gray and jagged against a sky streaked with the first hints of dawn. A new day creeping in after a night that had felt endless. Tatum sat beside her, his chair pulled so close the armrest brushed the bed rail. His flannel sleeve rolled up to reveal a forearm scratched and weathered from years of scraping by. He hadn't left her side since the cops took Gideon away, his bloodshot eyes fixed on her like she might vanish if he looked away. Juniper's gaze drifted to the baby, her fingers tracing the edge of his blanket with a gentleness that seemed too heavy for an 8-year-old. "He doesn't even know what happened," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He just sleeps." Tatum leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "That's a good thing, June. Means he's strong. Like you." She glanced up at him, her eyes still shadowed with exhaustion but carrying a flicker of something new, relief, maybe, or the tiniest spark of hope. "You think I'm strong?" she asked, her tone uncertain. Tatum nodded, his voice firm. "Toughest kid I've ever met. You made it through hell and back, and you're still here. That's more than most people could handle." The door swung open, and Dr. Ellis stepped in, his scrubs swapped for a wrinkled button-up, a styrofoam cup of coffee in hand. Behind him trailed a police officer, Officer Hayes, a broad-shouldered woman with a no-nonsense stare, her badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. She'd been the one to take Juniper's statement, her voice steady but kind through the toughest parts. "Morning," Ellis said, setting his coffee on the tray table. "How's our little fighter doing?" Juniper managed a small nod, clutching the baby closer. Hayes stepped forward, her boots clicking against the floor. "We've got an update," she said, her tone measured. "Gideon's in custody. Booked him last night. He's not talking yet, but we've got enough to hold him. Assault, endangerment, the works. He's not seeing daylight for a long time." Juniper's shoulders relaxed slightly, a breath she didn't know she'd been holding slipping out. "So he's really gone?" she asked, her voice trembling. Hayes nodded. "Locked up tight. You don't have to worry about him anymore." She paused, her eyes softening as she glanced at the baby. "But we need to figure out what's next for you, Juniper. Social services is involved now. They'll want to know where you're going, whether it's with your aunt or somewhere else." Juniper's face tightened, her fingers digging into the blanket. "I don't want to go with Zelda," she said quickly, her voice sharp with a fear she couldn't hide. "She left me with him. I don't trust her." Tatum straightened, his hand resting protectively on the bed rail. "She's staying with me," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I've been looking after her for 2 years. Fed her, kept a roof over her head. She's not going anywhere she doesn't feel safe." Hayes raised an eyebrow, jotting something on her notepad. "We'll need to vet that, Mr. Tatum. Background checks, home visits, the whole deal. You're not family, and with a case this messy, they'll want to be sure." Tatum's jaw clenched, but he nodded. "Do what you gotta do. I'm not letting her down." Ellis cleared his throat, stepping in before the tension thickened. "She's still recovering. Physically, she's out of the woods, but she'll need time. The baby's healthy, though. NICU's keeping him a few days for observation. Standard stuff." He glanced at Juniper, his voice softening. "You've got a little boy who's gonna need you, kiddo. But you don't have to do it alone." Juniper looked down at the sleeping infant, her expression a mix of awe and dread. "I don't even know how to be a mom," she murmured. "I'm just me." Tatum reached over, squeezing her shoulder gently. "You don't have to figure it all out today. We'll take it one step at a time. I'm here, June." The door creaked again, and Zelda hovered in the frame, her eyes red and puffy, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. "Can I just... Please, I need to talk to her," she said, her voice breaking. Hayes shot Tatum a look, but he didn't budge, his stare hard. Not unless she says so, he replied. Juniper shook her head, her voice small but firm. I don't want to see her right now. Zelda's face crumpled, but she didn't push, stepping back as Hayes waved her out. Give her space, the officer said, her tone clipped. We'll sort this later. The door clicked shut, leaving the room in a fragile silence. Outside, the hospital buzzed on, nurses calling out chart numbers, a janitor's mop sloshing down the hall, the faint wail of an ambulance pulling up to the ER. Word of Juniper's story had spread like wildfire through Detroit General, whispered in break rooms and texted between shifts. Kid that young with a baby? Unreal, a nurse muttered at the station. And that guy with her, hero or creep you pick. The rumors didn't reach Juniper, though not yet. She leaned back against the pillows, her eyes drifting to the window where the city sprawled out, gritty and unyielding. Tatum, she said quietly, thanks for not leaving. He smiled, a tired, crooked thing. Never will, kid. We're in this together. The light outside brightened, the first real sun cutting through the haze, painting the room in soft golds. It wasn't much, just a crack in the gloom, but for Juniper it was enough to hold on to. She wasn't alone anymore, not with Tatum there, not with the tiny life in her arms breathing steady and sure. The road ahead was blurry, tangled with social workers and court dates and a city that wouldn't stop talking. But for now, in that small, quiet space, she felt something she hadn't in years. Safe. And as the dawn stretched over Detroit, it carried a promise. Not of an ending, but of a beginning she could face, one slow, stubborn step at a time.